Set in early 19th century England, where marriage often served as strategy rather than sentiment, Lady Eleanor Harcourt, at 27 and long dismissed as a spinster, watched her younger sisters marry well-placed lords while she quietly managed her family's dwindling estate. Yet when King George III's court prepared for a shift in power among the peerage, the nation's most influential nobleman, Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Strathmore, returned from years abroad with a reputation for icy resolve and unmatched political sway. To everyone's shock, he sought no alliance with ambitious debutantes. Instead, he arrived at the Harcourt estate, dropped to one knee, and offered Eleanor not a calculated arrangement, but a proposal born of admiration for her intellect, her steadiness, and the quiet strength she had shown while society overlooked her, defying every expectation of rank, age, and duty in the Regency era. Rain fell in thin, silvery threads across the Harcourt carriage windows as Lady Eleanor Harcourt returned from yet another evening she would sooner forget. The lamps along the drive blurred into pale halos, and the horses' hooves struck the wet earth with the weary rhythm of a night that had dragged too long. She kept her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap, as though sheer composure might silence the harsh words she had overheard in the Marchmont ballroom. Those girls, barely out of the schoolroom, giddy with youth, had spoken with the careless cruelty of people who believe their futures guaranteed. "The eldest Miss Harcourt is practically an installation," one had whispered, "present in every season, yet never chosen." Another had tittered that Eleanor might soon be counted among the household furnishings, elegant, untouched, and irrelevant. Eleanor had stood close enough to see their fans flutter, but too far to pretend their words had not landed. She had learned long ago that humiliation seldom arrived with ceremony. It slipped quietly behind one's ribs and lodged there. Her 27 years had been a testament to quiet endurance. While her sisters dazzled at dances and luncheons, she managed the estate accounts, wrote urgent letters to creditors, soothed her mother's anxieties, and took upon herself every thankless task that ensured the Harcourt name remained upright. Beauty had never been her greatest currency, though once, when she was very young, she had been complimented for a certain serene elegance. Now society saw only age, restraint, and reliability, three qualities that guaranteed admiration in servants and indifference in suitors. The carriage halted before the estate's entrance. The Harcourt home, though proud in its architecture, bore the unmistakable wear of diminishing fortune. The roof tiles needed replacing, the gardens cried out for a fuller staff, and the lamps at the door flickered from neglect. Eleanor stepped down without waiting for assistance, drawing her shawl close as rain dotted her hair. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of beeswax and old roses, a scent that had once comforted her but now seemed tinged with melancholy. Her mother appeared on the staircase, still awake despite the hour. "Your sister insisted on waiting for news of the ball," she said, voice gentle but expectant. "Was it a pleasant evening?" Eleanor offered a practiced smile, one she had perfected over years of assembling calm from fragments. "Pleasant enough," she replied. "Your embroidery will be far more thrilling than the conversations tonight." That earned a small laugh, and her mother retreated, satisfied with the answer. Eleanor ascended to her room slowly, aware of every creaking step that betrayed the age of the house. She did not undress immediately. Instead, she stood before the mirror, touching her cheek where a careless debutante had brushed past her without apology. The reflection she met was neither plain nor grand. It was simply a woman accustomed to being overlooked. Yet, beneath the surface of her composure, a small ember of defiance still glowed. She had learned to live with solitude, but she had not consented to insignificance. Her thoughts drifted back to the ballroom, to the moment she had lingered near the conservatory doors and glimpsed the man whose presence caused half the county to stand a little straighter. Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Strathmore, had returned from his diplomatic service abroad after nearly 7 years. He was a figure woven more from legend than mundane gossip, known for decisive action, a formidable intellect, and a composure that unsettled even seasoned diplomats. When he entered a room, whispers shifted like wind. Eleanor had observed him briefly from across the floor before a waltz separated her view. She had expected him to be surrounded by ambitious beauties or calculating mothers. Instead, he stood alone, surveying the room with an unreadable expression, as though he found little within it worthy of attention. Their brief encounter had been accidental. She had withdrawn from the crowd to steady herself after overhearing the girl's biting remarks. As she turned toward a side corridor, she nearly collided with him. He bowed with austere precision, and she offered a quick curtsy, cheeks warming at the unexpected closeness. His gaze, cool, assessing, and far too direct, lingered a moment longer than courtesy required. She murmured an apology, certain he would forget her within moments. Yet something in his expression suggested a faint recognition, though she could not think why. She had never been near the circles he occupied. He said nothing more than, "You are not intruding, Miss Harcourt," but the timbre of his voice stayed with her. It held clarity, purpose, and a depth that made her feel uncomfortably seen. Now, in her quiet room, she found herself replaying that moment. The Duke's nod had been polite, but his eyes had carried the weight of a man who measured more than appearances. It unsettled her precisely because she had spent her life unnoticed. Being truly observed just once was almost disorienting. Morning brought no relief. The household erupted into cheerful preparation for her youngest sister's engagement celebration. Eleanor moved among the servants with the ease of someone used to performing work without acknowledgement. She arranged flowers, reviewed menus, and soothed the nerves of both bride-to-be and mother, all while keeping the ache of last night hidden. Her sisters, though fond of her, had long ceased to understand the particular shame she bore. They believed her unmarried state a matter of choice or temperament, not the consequence of being persistently overshadowed. Before guests began arriving for luncheon, a small envelope was delivered. The seal bore the insignia of a family Eleanor recognized but rarely encountered. Inside was a simple note inviting the Harcourt family to a private reception in London the following week, an event expected to mark the Duke of Strathmore's formal re-entry into English society. Though the note was addressed to the entire household, Eleanor sensed immediately that her sisters would see it as a chance to parade their charms before the most unattainable man in England. She folded the invitation carefully, knowing she would attend out of duty rather than hope. The day unfolded with predictable elegance and predictable tedium. Guests gushed over her sister's good fortune, praised the match, and offered unsolicited advice on wedding arrangements. Eleanor accepted each comment gracefully, though every compliment directed at others seemed to wear her down by degrees. When one lady remarked that Eleanor must take pride in guiding her sisters so well, she nearly faltered. Pride was a luxury she had not felt in years. By evening, the guests had departed, and the house fell quiet again. Eleanor stepped into the garden, seeking solace beneath the fading light. Clouds lingered low, but the rain had stopped, leaving the rose bushes glistening with droplets. The air was cool, fragrant, and heavy with unsaid questions. She stood there, absorbing the stillness, trying to quench the sense of being perpetually displaced, useful but unwanted, present but uncelebrated. As she turned to return inside, footsteps sounded on the gravel path beyond the hedge. She expected a servant or groundskeeper, yet the stride was firm, deliberate, and unfamiliar. The figure paused just beyond the archway, and though she could not yet see him clearly, a strange awareness prickled through her, a sense that her world, so predictable in its disappointments, was on the verge of shifting. It was not a moment of triumph or revelation, merely a breath of possibility. Yet for Eleanor Harcourt, who had long believed her life destined for quiet invisibility, even the smallest shift felt like a spark in the dark. A week after the quiet interruption in the Harcourt garden, the moment that had left Eleanor with an inexplicable sense of shifting fate, the family traveled to London for the private reception in honor of the Duke of Strathmore's return. The city greeted them with its characteristic fusion of grandeur and soot-darkened elegance. Towering townhouses, clattering carriages, and streets thick with anticipation, as though all of society collectively held its breath in expectation of the Duke's appearance. Eleanor, seated beside her mother in the carriage, felt the familiar weight of duty settle upon her. She had dressed with careful modesty, selecting a gown of soft gray-blue satin and gloves that concealed the ink marks still faint on her fingers from estate paperwork. She intended to blend into the evening's tapestry, to act as chaperone and safeguard for her sisters, yet some unquiet corner of her mind whispered that the night would not permit anonymity. The reception was held in the Cavendish townhouse, a place spoken of with both reverence and subtle apprehension. It was a powerhouse in the most literal sense, home to generations of dukes whose influence had shaped political tides. The entrance hall alone seemed to measure visitors, its marble columns and mirrored panels offering no warmth. Eleanor crossed the threshold with her usual poise, though the grandeur pressed upon her like a heavy cloak. Her sisters whispered excitedly as they removed their wraps. Her mother, though outwardly serene, could not disguise her vigilance as she scanned the room for potential allies or critics. Eleanor found her place at the edge of the social current, content to observe rather than participate. The room shimmered with candlelight, reflected in polished silver and glass. A quartet played from a raised platform, their notes weaving through the conversations like a delicate thread. Everywhere she looked, ambitious mothers directed their daughters with discreet nudges, ensuring they were positioned within the Duke's line of sight. Yet Alexander Cavendish was nowhere to be seen. The anticipation of his arrival electrified the crowd, creating a tension Eleanor did not share. She had glimpsed him enough to know he would enter only when he deemed the moment necessary, not when society clamored for it. As she stood near a table displaying rare botanical watercolors, a voice spoke quietly behind her. "You favor the winter bloomers." The recognition struck her before she fully turned. The Duke stood a measured distance away, his posture impeccably aligned, his expression unreadable. He wore no ostentation. His authority required none. Eleanor managed a polite curtsy. "They are resilient," she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "They flourish when little else dares." A faint suggestion of a smile touched his mouth, too brief to decipher. Then they resembled their observer. Before she could reply, another party approached, eager to draw his attention. The Duke inclined his head to Eleanor in a gesture both courteous and unmistakably deliberate, then turned to greet the others. The exchange lasted scarcely moments, yet it left her with a disquiet she could not easily dispel. It was not admiration he had shown, nor indeed flirtation. It was recognition again, as though he perceived something in her that others overlooked. She withdrew from the crowd before her thoughts grew too unruly. Later in the evening, as she searched the corridors for a moment of quiet, a footman intercepted her with a small parcel. "For Miss Harcourt," he said, presenting the object with the discreet composure expected of well-trained staff. Eleanor accepted it with surprise. The package was slender, wrapped in cream paper and sealed with wax bearing the Cavendish emblem. She hesitated before breaking the seal, aware that even the appearance of impropriety could harm her family. Inside she found a sketchbook of fine quality, its pages filled with detailed illustrations of winter roses, hellebores, and snowdrops, plants she had admired earlier that evening. The drawings were accompanied by a brief line in a hand she recognized immediately. "A mind that delights in subtleties deserves them in kind." The words unsettled her more than any elaborate declaration might have. She knew the Duke was a man who guarded his speech with precision, offering only what he meant. A gift from such a man was not casual. She closed the sketchbook carefully and concealed it beneath her shawl, silently vowing to return it at once. Yet she could not deny the warmth that had risen in her chest, an unwelcome yet undeniably human response. Her resolve to restore propriety faltered when she entered the main hall and sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Whispers slithered through the crowd. Eyes turned toward her with open curiosity. A group of ladies blocked her path, their smiles too sweet to be sincere. "Miss Harcourt," one of them cooed, "we were just discussing how fortunate you must feel to receive such consideration." Eleanor maintained her composure. I'm afraid I do not understand. Oh, come now, another woman said, tapping her fan against her lips. A private discussion in the conservatory at last month's ball. A gift delivered tonight. One might think the Duke's attention had found a rather unexpected destination. The insinuation struck cleanly. Eleanor's cheeks heated despite her restraint. You mistake courtesy for intent, she replied. His Grace has shown no partiality toward me. Has he not? The lady's tone dripped with false innocence. Then perhaps we are all mistaken. Laughter bubbled among them like a poisoned spring. Eleanor walked away before her dignity sustained further injury. She found refuge in the conservatory at the back of the townhouse, its glass panels gleaming in the moonlight. The scent of jasmine and citrus wrapped around her, offering a fragile comfort. She pressed her fingertips to her temples, wishing she could dislodge the humiliation clinging to her. The sound of footsteps halted her breath. She straightened, prepared to face yet another round of mockery, but it was the Duke who entered. His gaze swept the room rapidly, then settled on her. You left the gathering rather suddenly. I needed air, she said, keeping her voice level. Your guests are generous with their commentary. He moved closer, stopping at a respectful distance. I'm aware of their tendencies. Society seldom tolerates what it cannot categorize. He glanced toward her hands. You received the sketchbook. Yes, and I intend to return it. She extended the parcel, though the gesture cost her more than she expected. Such attentions invite misinterpretation. He did not reach for it. A gift loses its purpose when treated as contraband. I offered it in acknowledgement, not courtship. His tone softened. Would you have preferred I sent nothing? She hesitated. I would prefer to protect my family. Rumors harm more than reputations. They harm only the insecure, he said. Strength is not diminished by the speculation of idle minds. Strength does not pay the cost when scandal spreads, she countered. A silence followed, taut and electric. The Duke regarded her with an intensity that bordered on disarming. You are the first person in years who speaks to me without calculation, he said quietly. If my actions have burdened you, I will cease them. But understand this. Acknowledgement is not a weapon. I do not offer it lightly. Before Eleanor could respond, a shadow shifted near the doorway. Someone fled the conservatory with hurried steps, no doubt ready to twist the scene into gossip. Eleanor's heart sank. It seems too late, she whispered. The Duke's expression sharpened. Then let them speak. I will not allow your name to be tarnished. You cannot prevent what they choose to imagine, she said. They will shape this moment into something unrecognizable. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near murmur. Then let us define the truth before they do. She felt the ground shift beneath the words, subtle yet seismic. But he did not elaborate. He simply regarded her with a gravity she could not decipher. Eleanor could not hold his gaze without feeling exposed, yet she did not look away. When they rejoined the gathering, whispers ignited immediately, flaring like wildfire through the crowd. Expressions shifted, some curious, others triumphant, a few genuinely startled. Eleanor felt her mother's worried glance and gestured subtly that all was well, though the gesture was a lie. The Duke remained composed, offering her the courtesy of distance to avoid further misinterpretation, though the damage was already seeded. By the time the Harcourts returned home, the air outside had thickened with mist, blurring the edges of the world. Eleanor stared out the carriage window, watching lamplight shimmer on the wet cobblestones. Her mother sat tense beside her, unwilling to voice the fear simmering beneath her calm facade. Her sisters whispered among themselves, torn between worry and fascination. Eleanor, however, felt unnervingly still. Something irreversible had begun, not through romance, but through recognition, through the simple, dangerous act of being noticed by a man whose choices reshaped entire rooms. As the carriage creaked through the sleeping countryside, she closed her eyes and held the sketchbook tightly against her. She did not yet know whether it was a symbol of promise or peril, but she sensed, with a clarity that stole her breath, that nothing about her life would remain quiet for long. Rain hissed softly against the Harcourt carriage as it wound along the narrow country road, the wheels cutting steady grooves into the softened earth. Inside, Lady Eleanor Harcourt sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the faint tremor in her fingers betraying what her expression refused to reveal. She had left the Marchmont ball less than an hour ago, yet the sting of whispered mockery still clung to her like damp wool. The memory replayed with unwelcome clarity. Two debutantes, no older than 19, their cheeks flushed with excitement and entitlement, their voices pitched just low enough to feign innocence. "The eldest Miss Harcourt is practically a fixture," one had said, her fan fluttering lazily. "Always present, never sought." The other had giggled behind lace. "She will soon be counted among the painting frames, ornate but unnoticed." Eleanor had turned away before their amusement could deepen into pity, but their words had followed her across the ballroom like shadows. At 27, she had long learned that dignity was not an armor, but a quiet endurance. Once, she had believed herself poised for a respectable match, the sort that promised companionship if not passion. But years of caring for the estate after her father's death, of managing her mother's delicate nerves, and of guiding her younger sisters through the glittering labyrinth of society had altered her path. Duty had a way of reshaping aspirations. What she had not anticipated was the ease with which society dismissed a woman who prioritized responsibility over self-advertisement. Her beauty had become a muted memory in the eyes of others, and her worth was tallied not in suitors, but in tasks completed without complaint. When the carriage halted before the aging Harcourt estate, Eleanor descended into the drizzle with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to weathering far more daunting storms. The manor loomed against the night sky, proud yet undeniably worn. Its windows glowed warmly, masking the financial fragility that threatened its foundations. Eleanor's presence often served as the invisible scaffolding holding everything upright. She pushed open the heavy door and slipped into the entrance hall, where the scent of beeswax and old roses lingered in familiar harmony. Her mother appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a shawl as though she had been pacing. "You're back later than expected," she said, her voice soft yet tight with unspoken hopes. "Was it a pleasant evening? Did you enjoy yourself at all?" Eleanor offered one of her gentle, impenetrable smiles. "Pleasant enough, Mama." The orchestra played beautifully, and the Marchmonts hosted with their usual refinement. Her mother searched her face for something, perhaps triumph, perhaps the smallest hint of romantic promise, before giving a resigned nod. "Your sisters will be eager to hear of every detail in the morning." With that, she retreated down the corridor, her footsteps receding like an echo of long-faded ambitions. Eleanor ascended to her room without summoning a maid. The candlelight flickered as she stood before the mirror, her reflection sharpened by fatigue. Her eyes, once praised for their unusual clarity, now seemed overshadowed by the responsibilities she carried. She touched her cheek absently, recalling the moment earlier that evening when she had retreated to the edge of the ballroom for a breath of composure. It was there, at the boundary between society's brilliance and her own invisibility, that she had encountered him. Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Strathmore, had returned to England after years abroad in diplomatic service, and his presence had stirred the entire assembly into an eager tempest. He was a man sculpted by the gravity of power, broad-shouldered, impeccably mannered, and silent more often than he spoke. Rumor held that he possessed a mind as formidable as his lineage, and a temperament sharpened by negotiation with foreign courts. Eleanor had expected never to be close enough to observe him directly, yet fate had arranged otherwise. She had been stepping away from the crowd when he emerged from a side corridor. Their paths intersected with such precision that she had nearly collided with him. She had hastily offered a curtsy, mortified by the impropriety, but he had inclined his head with a courtesy so deliberate it startled her. For an instant, his gaze held hers, steady, assessing, and with a depth that suggested he took measure of more than appearances. She recalled how her breath had hitched, how her voice had faltered when she murmured an apology. He had replied with a simple, "You are not in my way, Miss Harcourt," but the timbre of his voice resonated with a peculiar gravity. Even now, standing alone in her room, she could not quite banish the way that moment had unsettled her. It was not admiration she had sensed, nor anything so sentimental. It was awareness, as though she had been seen clearly for the first time in years. The following days passed in their usual sequence of obligations. Her sisters fluttered about in anticipation of yet another engagement festivity, and the Harcourt household brimmed with the mild chaos of preparations. Eleanor moved through it all with calm efficiency, though the memory of the Duke's gaze lingered like an unfinished melody. She chastised herself for allowing it to occupy her thoughts. He moved in circles far removed from her own. His world thrived on politics and influence, while hers was anchored in practicality and quiet resilience. No rational mind would predict that their paths might cross again. Yet fate did not always consult reason. One afternoon, as Eleanor oversaw the delivery of floral arrangements for her sister's celebration, a liveried messenger arrived bearing a letter sealed with wax. The insignia was unmistakable, and her pulse quickened despite her best efforts at composure. She opened the envelope with steady fingers, expecting a formal invitation extended to the entire family. Instead, she found a note addressed to her specifically. The message was brief, its handwriting controlled but elegant. "Miss Harcourt, I would value the opportunity to discuss our recent encounter. If you are amenable, I shall call upon the Harcourt estate in 2 days' time. Respectfully, A. Cavendish." Her breath stilled. She reread the words twice, seeking any hint of ambiguity. There was none. The Duke intended to visit, openly, formally, and without any pretense of coincidence. The implications struck her with force. A duke did not call upon an unmarried woman without purpose, and society was merciless in its interpretations. Her family's precarious standing could be shattered by even a whisper of impropriety. She folded the letter with measured care and pressed it to her chest for a fleeting moment, battling a swell of emotion she refused to name. When the day of his visit arrived, the household contracted into a state of suspended breath. Servants polished silver with frantic devotion. Her mother fretted over seating arrangements, and her sisters speculated with unrestrained excitement. Eleanor alone remained quiet. She stood by the window, watching the long drive with a tension that coiled through her entire being. When the Cavendish carriage finally appeared, its black lacquer gleaming under the noon sun, her heartbeat seemed to echo against her ribs. Alexander Cavendish entered the drawing room with the grace of a man accustomed to commanding every space he occupied. Yet when his gaze found Eleanor, something softened imperceptibly. He bowed to her mother, exchanged polite greetings with her sisters, and finally turned his full attention upon Eleanor. His presence altered the very air, lending it a subtle weight that made every movement deliberate. "I trust this visit does not inconvenience you," he said, his tone courteous but carrying an underlying firmness. "Not at all, Your Grace," she replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Though I admit I was surprised by your letter. I find it best to address matters directly," he said, and our previous meeting warranted such clarity. Her mother excused herself to attend to household affairs, and her sisters departed with a flurry of whispered excitement, leaving Eleanor alone with the Duke. They walked into the small garden adjoining the drawing room, where spring buds trembled on the branches. Eleanor folded her hands before her, acutely aware of the silence between them. "You mentioned wishing to discuss our encounter," she said, meeting his gaze with quiet resolve. "I hope I did not inadvertently give offense." "Quite the opposite," he replied. "I meant to convey that your composure, your restraint, did not go unnoticed. I am accustomed to excess, ambition, and artifice. Your honesty was refreshing." His words unsettled her. Praise, when spoken by men of lesser consequence, was easily disregarded, but from him it felt weighted with intention. "Your Grace," she said softly, "your acknowledgment may be well meant, but it invites assumptions that could harm my family. I cannot afford." He stepped closer, though still maintaining propriety. Then allow me to state my purpose plainly. I do not extend attention without intention. If society must speculate, let it. My regard is not frivolous. Her breath caught, and for the first time in years, she felt the fragile flutter of possibility. Not vanity, not aspiration, simply the quiet, trembling notion that she had been seen. They stood in the garden, the world narrowing around them, the air thick with unspoken consequences. Eleanor sensed the precise moment her life deviated from its familiar trajectory. It was not a declaration, nor a gesture, nor even a promise. It was the realization that the most powerful duke in England had fixed his gaze upon her, not with idle curiosity, but with intent that would reshape everything that followed.